People often ask me about trauma and how do you heal childhood trauma? It's a very fair question because as a human being, the likelihood that you'll have to deal with some measure of childhood trauma that occurs in your life and affects you throughout your life is probably 99.99%. I wouldn't guarantee 100, but I actually have never met anyone who has not had to reckon with trauma. It seems to be part of our soul curriculum on this planet is that we come in with a purity and an authenticity, a beingness, and we're beaming. We don't know how to do anything but be authentic, and we're radiant. And then invariably, as I've mentioned in other videos, each of us as human beings have some measure of traumatic experience. It could be a parent that's raging. It could be a fire that took place in the home. It could be a brother that was abusive to you sexually. Whatever it may be, this then seeds that experience in your consciousness. And then you actually interpret based on your own tendency to interpret particular ways. The key is in the interpretation. The trauma, yes, but the interpretation is key. And any conclusions that we make based on what occurred. So let me give you an example from my own experience. My experience was somewhat more traumatic than most people face, but I've also talked with many people who've had far more horrific experiences than I have. But up until 10 years old, I lived in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, California. I was really thrilled with my life. I remember I was flowing along. I loved school. I loved baseball. I had a sense of who I was. My teachers saw me and they championed me in growing. In sixth grade, the sixth grade teacher chose me to learn to lead square dancing in front of the auditorium for the dance. It was like I was really kind of coming into my own and blossoming. But at 10, my older sister was 17. She started using heroin. She became a serious heroin addict and dealer for 17 years. So she just went way off an edge, which is very traumatic to witness. She'd come back in the house. She'd want to destroy the house. It's very dramatic, very contentious. My parents were so disturbed by it, as was I. I also had an older brother. So when I was 10, he was 5 years older, 15. He started getting in trouble with the law. He took it all the way. He became, over time, in the next few years, a white supremacist gang leader in the prisons, had tattoos all over, and he murdered and violence against Black Americans a lot. And this is on the heels of my sister. Now, my parents and I are just engulfed in pain. I mean, it was merely a matter of survival. For years, it was very dark. But there were experiences that I had from a trauma standpoint. My brother would come home in between getting out of prison, and he'd have his skin hood friends with the shaved heads and the tattoos. And they're getting guns out of our attic in my folks' house, and they're getting ready to go and on a murder spree. And I see them loading the guns, and it's very clear what they're going to do. They're talking about it. They're actually bizarrely gleeful about it. It was very haunting for me. That scene right there, I was just doing my homework right in the dining room, and they brought out all this stuff, and then away they went. So, trauma. So for me, the way the trauma really played out is I was so engulfed in pain. I was just trying to pretend to myself and my parents and everybody else that I was fine. That was how I adapted, my adaptive self, to survive. So I pretended, I put on a face. Even to me, I didn't know how difficult it was. But I was in so much pain that about every month or two, it would build up inside because I wasn't talking to anybody about it. No one had the wherewithal to say, how are you doing in the midst of this in the family? It just didn't happen. My folks were loving, but they just weren't psychologically aware. So every month and a half, I would get frustrated with something. Like if I was pitching baseball and if the umpire was not calling my strikes, I would start yelling at him, cussing at him at the top of my lungs. And I would let out all this pain in that situation. And then strangely enough, I felt ashamed. I felt out of control. And strangely, I also felt relieved because I let out a lot of the pain. And then it would start building up again. And it would always be activated by something physical level frustration. If I'm putting a screw in a fan in a car and I keep dropping the screw, I would melt down and just be out of control. And this happened over and over through my life, easily until my 40s, 50s. It haunted me because I did not have control over myself once I would get activated and my trauma would kick in. So, but around when I was 50, I went to an anger management class and I started keeping a journal about where were the indicators early before I'd go 0 to 60 and explode. I never hurt anybody. It was all physical level things. I pound my desk or hit the car. So I was becoming a student of my traumatic response to my early childhood, my teens. And I began to discover the key indicators in my body when I was getting upset. It's like I would start to cut off my wife and not listen to her. I would stop breathing, and I would start to tell myself certain things that I noticed. And the thing that I realized that was so valuable is what I was starting to tell myself is the world is against me, and I'm in a battle for my survival against the universe. That's how much I made up an interpretation. As traumatic as that experience was with my brother, what I made up was false, but I carried it for 50 years. So it's helpful to get a hold of the misinterpretation related to the trauma. And that's just one example with mine. And so I began to slow things down. And whenever I would get into the vicinity of anything frustrating, I would slow down and I would back away, or I'd go for a walk, or I'd ask for help. And I started to kind of diffuse that automatic out of control response. Very rarely happens now. It can, but I watch very, very carefully. And in particular, when that gets activated, I tell myself the story that I know to be true. The universe is not against me. And there's no battle for my survival. That's all in the past. My battle now is of a spiritual warrior nature. It's about love. It's about compassion. It's about healing. So when I do get activated and I start to get frustrated, I know I have access to the same place, that wound inside. And that wound has all those experiences of getting out of control and frustrated and embarrassed and ashamed all the way up to my 50s. So it's like a fuse that goes, shoo. It's powerful. These things are very powerful. That's why working with trauma and PTSD is not so easy. But the key is to get a hold of the false narrative that feeds the actual trauma in a repeating pattern. That was my soul's curriculum. It's part of my soul's curriculum in this lifetime. And seeing it that way, like, well, here's an area that's a weakness, an Achilles heel, that I can actually make a strength. And I have. And I saw a few years ago, I realized I could actually become extraordinarily patient. I could become masterful at not letting myself let go of the reins of my consciousness when I'm upset. I can manage the emotions. I can hold steady. The key is awareness. Key is always awareness. So there's an example of how that early trauma, understandably so, my desire to survive and have an adaptive self, reflected in a lifelong, severely dysfunctional pattern, scared the people around me. They didn't know what to do, didn't know what to do when I was a teenager either. But I learned to actually build a level of compassionate awareness and holding with myself that I never had when I was throughout the ages 12 to like 19. Dark years. So thankfully they served me. They did help me grow. I'm glad they're over. So I thought I'd share with you a little bit of the nature of how the healing of trauma through compassionate healing and access to the world of the trauma, the inner experience of the trauma, is of a very particular nature for each person with every trauma they hold. but there's typically major patterns that can be seen. So that was mine. Thanks so much for listening. Hope any of this that I'm sharing might inspire you to go further in your own healing, in your own awareness and awakening. This life is meant to challenge us. It's a school, but it strengthens us as well. It's designed for us to anchor our gains and climb higher. It's very important to learn how to work with the human side of us that has to walk through that process of evolving. Thanks.